All right, good. So that's just like full unraveling then.
Yeah, pretty much. And then so he told our kids at different times.
How did he tell them? Did you guys get on the same page before he did that?
I told the kids after. No, this was pretty soon. Like things were still pretty tense between me and Heidi.
It was within a couple weeks.
Yeah, the kids,
a week or two.
The kids, especially the older ones, could pick up on the tension. So I got most of the kids together. One of our kids was at gymnastics or something. So I told 3 of our 4 kids in my bedroom, just sat them down. I told them, and our oldest, Grace.
We'll mention Grace.
Yeah,
she commented.
Grace thought I was kidding. She's like, "What? No, you're just kidding, right? You're kidding. It's a joke." And, I finally convinced her it wasn't a joke. And she had been the most, I guess, indoctrinated in the church. So she pushed back a little bit.
She just started Young Women's. That was her first time going to girls' camp that year, I think. Or maybe that happened later. Anyway, so she was 12. So she had just kind of been the most invested in it.
So she struggled a little bit. By the time I got back from Iraq, she was a disbelieving atheist as well.
Whoa.
Yeah.
How long were you in Iraq again?
7 months.
Holy moly. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, things cycled kind of quick after I left. The rest of the kids, like our oldest son, Noah, he didn't care. He was like, yeah, I think church is boring. I don't want to go. And then our youngest, Sam,
5, he didn't.
He's like our kid that has not been touched at all by the church. We took him to church once in Arizona when we were visiting family years later, and they sat him down in the class with a bunch of other kids
in primary,
and the teacher asks, "Okay, let's go down the line and everybody say your blessings." And
no, they had to write down with crayons a list of blessings.
Yeah. And they get to Sam and they're like, "Sam, what are your blessings?" And he's like, "What's a blessing?"
And like, what do you mean by
blessing?
Like that was just like the terminology.
Right. And if you think about it, if you weren't raised in the church with this idea that God gives you things and these things are called blessings, you wouldn't know what that word really meant. So, and then I told Isabel, our youngest daughter, later, just on there, we went for a walk, and I told her, I think that went well. What didn't go well was when I tried to tell my family. And I guess I would say that my situation with my family was, we had we loved each other. I didn't feel like my parents did not love me, but we weren't very close because I'm pretty independent. We'd been living away for years during our medical education, and we'd stayed connected mostly through like emails and very rare, phone calls. And so I just thought, and then another thing, I don't think I'm very good verbally. I think I do better if I write things out. That's sort of my strength. And I could take some time and write it out logically, and people would read it, and, they would know where I'm coming from. And so I decided that it would be best to write an email and send it out to the entire family.
And your parents are...
And my dad is the mission president in Africa at the time, and it didn't go well for obvious reasons. So that was a mistake. Even though I read my email now, and I don't think I said anything too offensive. I didn't try to convert anybody. I just wanted, the big thing for me was I didn't want them to think all the stereotypes of people who leave the church are true with me. I didn't leave because I was sinful, stealing money from the church, or having an affair, or looking at pornography, or wanting to drink coffee and alcohol. I left after a careful study and thought and prayer about the church. It was a careful process, and I wanted to try to get that out as unemotionally as possible. I just thought that my logic could at least create a little bit of space that they could listen to me later on. And it just went bad. It was a terrible thing. My emails went out to the family like, "Hey, Josh is just trying to convince you. Don't listen to him." Walls came up, the wagons circled. Yeah. And I tried to resolve these concerns that were popping up by more emails. I go back and I read these emails, and it's so painful because I just was making things worse. All the things that I was trying to avoid, those judgments, the alienation from family, the estrangement, it was just happening. And there was nothing that I could do to stop it. And that's exactly what I wanted to avoid. I wanted my family I wanted to continue those relationships and fix any of the problems that would pop up. But I couldn't do it because I was emo.
And you did provide details, right, of why?
Yeah, I did,
Yeah.
but I tried to avoid, like, did you know that Joseph Smith had 33 wives? And it just was like, here's my issues: polygamy, blacks in the priesthood. I won't go into details, but these are the things that caused me doubt and caused me to leave.
It's so hard because, and I talk about this, I call it the Nephi effect. And I wish the Book of Mormon had a female character or two to mention, that we could have a female hero in the Book of Mormon, but alas, there aren't that many. But it's this idea that if we're these Orthodox TBM righteous members, we get used to that status of being viewed as faithful, as strong, as courageous. And I think most of us feel like it's strength and courage and integrity that lead to the faith crisis, because it's not fun, it's not easy. It's a matter of doing what is right and letting the consequence follow. And at the same time, that's not how it's perceived by our family members. It's perceived by them as weakness and evil and sin. And so we desperately want to not lose our Nephi status by helping them just see that it was actually a matter of integrity and goodness and logic and truth. And that if you can just somehow explain that to them, then they'll go, oh my gosh, Josh and Heidi are actually brilliant, amazing, courageous people. But in reality, when you're in that mindset, there's no righteous way to leave the church. There's no truthful, courageous. It's got to be Satan. It's got to be sin. It's got to be deception. There's no other Mormon construct that allows a graceful exit to be possible. And this is where once Thomas McConkie a long time ago said to me, a cult is any organization that won't let you leave with your dignity intact. And I'm not saying the church is a cult. What I'm saying is that there's no conception of an Orthodox Mormon of anyone who could leave the church with integrity and dignity.
Right. And I think that was something that I was responding to as well, because I predicted that would happen. I had earned a lot of status in my family and in my community. I was respected. People looked up to me. They thought I was really smart. And now I could see how, because I left the church, all that would tumble. And so my reputation was at risk. We were laughing the other night. I feel a lot like Alexander Hamilton when I read his book, not his book, but the book about Alexander Hamilton, and really just got immersed in the play. And there's that scene when he writes the Reynolds pamphlet. He's accused of stealing money from the treasury, and he doesn't want to be accused of stealing. So he says, no. I was actually paying off Mariah Reynolds' husband, who I was having sex with.
Tells
Mariah
all
Reynolds.
the details.
And he just spilled. It's the first political sexual scandal in America, and it just goes over terribly for Alexander Hamilton. And that's sort of, I think, what I was making the same mistake, thinking that I could write my way out of this event by just being honest and telling people, what was in my heart, and they would understand. And well, it didn't go well for him. It didn't go well for me.
Never going to be president now. Never going to be president now. Yeah. And I think there's one standard rule in coming out to family and friends, which is less is more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
We learned that the hard way.
I sometimes counsel people now, just like, hey, we don't feel about the church like we used to, but we love you, and it's okay if we never talk about it again. Yeah. Like that's a perfectly acceptable coming out letter to me now, And even I even ask people to consider an extra burden, which is to say, but please don't think of us as scary. We'll never ever talk to you about the church again. We support your belief. We'll fight for your beliefs. Almost going overboard on the reassurance and saying almost nothing about actually what happened. Because the truth is, 95% of believers don't want to know. And those who say they want to know, don't want to know. And if you tell them, they're going to fight you, or it's just going to make things worse, even if they ask. And so I tell people, make them earn the details. And it's much better to refer them, like, oh, okay, you want to know? Go, I don't want to mess with your faith, but if you really want to know, it's your 10th time asking me, okay, go read Fawn Brody or go read CES Letter. But I'm not going to be the bearer of bad news, because I value our relationship so much that I would never want to do anything to hurt it. So if you're going to learn this stuff, learn it on your own accord. It's not going to come from me.
Well, that's great advice, but I decided to start a blog after that.
How'd that go? How'd that work for you?
Well, just as we're laughing about it, because it went over just as well as you would think. It went over terribly. But, I think the reason why I felt the need to do it was, again, I needed to be open, honest, transparent. I wanted to reassure people why I left the church. I wanted to let them know there are good reasons for me leaving the church. And I didn't think they knew those good reasons. And I wanted to create just enough space so that they could say, okay, create just a little bit of doubt so they would talk to me. Because, again, my goal was maintaining relationships. I just was going about it all wrong. And, the rumors spread. People started finding the link to my blog, and
it was bad.
It was bad.
Yeah, it was bad. It was kind of a mini scandal in like the Gilbert Mesa gossip scene, and people found out and it spread. I hadn't even told my family yet. And so my family found out through like gossip, from a third party, and it was just bad. It went over really bad. Yeah. So.
And it's hard because Orthodox believing Mormons, we can send 80,000 missionaries out at a time. The church can leverage social media. All our believing family and friends, or Trump supporters or Obama supporters, whatever, they feel comfortable saying whatever they want, whenever they want, bearing testimony, sharing the good news. And the reality is that if we value our relationships, those of us going through the transition, in a practical sense, have to live a double standard sometimes of hiding it and being quiet because we value our relationships. And it's not fair, but in a practical sense, it's what we have to do. It's not fair.
Yeah, it's true.
Really quick, I just want to touch in with some of our listeners. Chelsea writes, "This is like hearing someone else tell my own story." And she's great. She goes on to write, this was her approach with her family. To this day, she hasn't told them why she left, and they haven't asked, and it's been 4 years.
Yeah.
But it sounds like they kept the peace because she just didn't talk about it. So I think that's interesting. So let's see. Lori has some questions. Lori wants to know what happened with the bishopric. Did you talk about that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't. I went back to church and I told my bishop and the other counselor in the ward, and they took it really well. They couldn't have handled it better. I just basically said, I've lost my testimony. I need to be released, and I don't want you to talk to anybody about, me or why I left. And then I said, maybe don't send over home teachers for a while. I let him know I didn't do anything that would deserve church discipline. I ended up having another interview with my stake president. I think he also needed to know I hadn't done anything that would merit church court. And I actually met with our general authority, who was the area president in the South.
Oh, wow. What was that like?
His Elder Posey was his name.
Apparently the way it came about was that Elder...
So my parents were friends with Elder LeSueur, who's a friend from Arizona. He was my stake president for a time. He was in the second quorum, I think. And I think he may have called in a favor for my family to Elder Eyring, who Elder Eyring called
President Eyring. Right?
I'm sorry.
Is it President
President
Eyring?
Eyring.
I don't even know now.
Called Elder Posey. And so I got the call.
And
so
the reason I would just say that is it was a very nice thing to do for, his parents have often said, the leaders of the church are, they can seem like they're very removed from the general populace, but when people ask and they have opportunities, they will go out of their way to try to help people one-on-one. And so, it was a very nice attempt. It was a nice gesture to send whatever his name was.
Yeah, but absolutely unhelpful because, I brought up my concerns. They had nothing other than bear testimony. This was really before.
I went with him.
Yeah, I insisted that she come with me in the interview.
Isn't that crazy? You'd think these 70s general authorities would be world experts in resolving these issues.
He was so nice, but he had nothing to offer. So
yeah, that's so.
Other than just being super, super nice, he was very nice.
Yeah, that's hard.
That was that. The ward handled it well. Yeah, good reactions from the ward.
It's good that your bishop or stake president didn't view you as this big threat. Like I've heard a bad reaction is like, okay, we're calling a disciplinary council on you because you're going to lead people away just because you left the church,
Mm-hmm.
He actually even sent out a letter to the members of our ward, and the stake president knew, right?
Yeah,
that you were going to do it.
I told the stake president
I
was going to do it, and he said he was a little concerned. He asked me what was going to be in it, and I just, I said I'm concerned what people will think. I don't want them to think anything negative. I'm just going to say, don't assume these things.
You didn't go into
detail. Support my family. They're going to continue to come to church. I'll come back when I'm ready, because I was planning on at this time becoming one of these, stay LDS, New Order Mormons.
We found stay LDS at that time. Yeah.
Comes back to church and, just kind of sits in the back row, but that didn't happen.
Right. Let me just touch a few more things. Bruce writes that Bruce spoke with the 70. He had the same experience. No answers, only testimony. Katrina writes that it's been 25 years since she's left the church, and she still hasn't spoke to her family about why.
Wow.
So that's a record, I think. Annie writes, it's hard to balance the need to be understood and repair the distance felt with not damaging the relationship. And that's a really nice way to summarize that. And then Brittany and Kimberly love the Hamilton reference. So they're impressed. Michelle asks, I want to know, Heidi, how did your brother and his family and your parents, how was it for them?
Well, they did not, like I said, they kind of found out
through the rumor mills.
Yeah, through the rumor mills, and it was terrible. And so I was having to call and kind of explain. At that point, I was still active. I was in fact in the Relief Society presidency. And so, I kind of told my parents, like, look, he's still the same person.
It was on Josh. Josh was carrying the whole burden pretty much.
Right. Yeah. And I was still, now of course they were concerned that I was going to follow him, but
yeah, slippery slope.
But that was kind of the thing. And I mean, I think that they tried to be supportive, but also not like, they're very all about free agency. And so, it's kind of like, we're not going to try to force you, try to convince you one way or the other. And for the most part, that was kind of, they were a little bit hands off. And honestly, looking back, I think at the time I kind of interpreted that as, like, man, you don't even care that much. Like, I kind of, I would have interpreted it as, if you see a family member doing something, going down the wrong path, shouldn't you follow and try to bring them back? And actually I do feel like with my brother Christian, he's next in age to me, just younger than me. So we, grew up together and pretty close. And he was the only family member who really did try to kind of
rescue us.
Rescue, kind of like reach out and like, what's going on? I want to talk about it, or, you know, kind of checking in, like, what are you doing? And I remember at the time being bothered by that and kind of was like, you know,
We'll talk about the phone calls to the bishop.
Oh yeah. Well, he like called my bishop once and like kind of asked like, what's going on with Heidi, you know? And, you know, my bishop told me about this and I was like, what? You know, and I was really mad about it. But in hindsight, over the years, I've since then had several long conversations with him about the church and about you, John DeLynn. We've talked about John DeLynn. We've talked about a lot of things. And he, you know, we definitely don't agree on things, but I have come to realize that I think he is consistent in his beliefs. And I can appreciate that about him, because I now see that what he was doing was trying to basically do the same thing that Josh had been trying to do, which was Josh believed so strongly in what he had just discovered. He was trying to get his family to understand him. And like, don't you see that this makes sense? And my brother Christian was doing the exact same thing. Like, he really, really believes this. And he felt that it was, you know, it's a responsibility. And so something that that was a quality that I really, really admire in Josh. And I realized that's also a quality that my brother has. And I have to, even though I don't agree with his perspective, I can still admire that quality that he still has. And so that has, and the only reason that happened, or the only way that I've come to that conclusion, is because he was willing to engage with me. He was willing to have those talks with me. And he actually reached out and, you know, tried to convince me, so to speak, or pull me back. But in the end, I think it just made it better, because I can see that he was doing it for the right reasons, even if I don't agree with them.
There's kind of integrity that you can have integrity leaving and you can have integrity staying.
Yeah. So that was kind of a, you know, that's taken several years, but, you know, initially things were not good. I think my parents responded very differently from his parents. I think my parents were much more of the, I'd rather not know, you know, kind of a thing. Don't, unless we ask, don't tell us. And I made the mistake of probably telling them too much, more than they wanted to hear, and pushing, you know, trying to push more. And that actually is one thing I wanted to talk about. Is one of the things I've learned is the issue of boundaries, and how I'd never heard about this word before, but I was reading a book at one point in our transition that talked about boundaries. And so what the imagery that they used was, you know, you can think of boundaries as like a fence, like around your little space or your home. And your boundary can be like a big foreboding brick wall that's really stark and like, or your boundary can be like a white picket fence with yellow roses in front of it, you know? And, you know, the point is that, you know, a boundary can be something that clearly marks your space, but it can still be inviting, and you can choose who gets to come in. Maybe you have a little gate, you know, and you get to open that gate and invite people in sometimes. But you don't have to put up these walls, these brick walls that are intimidating, or send this message of like, I don't want to talk to you. It can be something that's more pleasant. And so that's kind of the thing I learned, is that there's a lot of boundary violations in the church growing up, you know, where you are especially as a woman, I think I was used to offering up information about my personal life that I normally wouldn't do, or I shouldn't feel obligated to do, but I didn't even question it. It was just kind of like, well, of course you answer the bishop truthfully if he asks you if you've been unchaste, you know, or if you've done this with a guy, you know, or whatever. And so, and then I think I kind of had that same sense with my parents, you know, I felt like I had to tell my parents if I have this change in my religious beliefs. I owe that to them. It's my responsibility. And really, you know, I've learned that belief is very personal. It's very private. There's no obligation to tell someone your beliefs unless you want to tell them. And you shouldn't. And I think I told my parents more out of that obligation, that feeling that I owe it to them. I have to tell them, rather than because I really needed that for myself. So I regret that. I wish that I would have just honored my own feelings in the matter and not have allowed like this cultural idea that I owe it to them in some way to tell them.
And reverse the situation. I think parents and family feel, at least ours did, I think there were some boundary violations the other way too, because they thought that they needed to kind of come in and at least save the kids or save Heidi. Mm-hmm. And so we had some negative interactions with the family about that. And so we learned, hey, there's this thing called boundaries. And so we created boundaries like, okay, this is stuff that you should not talk about. Don't talk about, hey, when are you going to get baptized, Isabel? And
yeah. And we maybe did that a little too forcefully at first.
Mm-hmm.
We did try to create clear boundaries, but I think they interpreted it as we don't ever want to talk about anything, like don't bring up religion in front of us kind of a thing. When in reality, that's not what we really meant. We just meant we don't want you to pressure our kids, or indirectly pressure our kids to be religious. So that kind of took time to figure out, and there's a lot of misunderstandings.
Just like it was important for me to give Heidi time and space to process all this, I think it's important that we give our families time and space as well, and only give them the information that they want. Like you said, I think that was a big learning curve. And I was trying to accelerate the process with my family as well. I was trying to have these big discussions with my parents, especially, just because I didn't want to have the relationship become estranged. I wanted to be honest with them. We're not Italian, but I think we have a little bit of Italian blood in us. We're just very open, honest, and that's what we always did. But as soon as I found myself on the outside of the tribe, so to speak, I noticed these walls and barriers coming up, and I was trying to break them down by having honest, open conversations. But really what I needed to do was just sit back, allow them time to process, and then initiate conversations on their own.
And in the meantime, try to spend meaningful time together in other ways that have nothing to do with the church. And that was really hard for us because we lived in Georgia, right? And so we don't see them very often. And so that was, we've often talked about that, how different things would have been in our transition if we had been living by family. But the fact that we were so far away, it made it extra hard. So.
And yeah, just one other thing I'll add is that I was being a little bit bipolar on this issue with my family too, because I would try to get them to engage in conversations. I would send them stuff, articles to, start discussions. I would say, we need to talk. And then I wasn't getting my needs met. Really what I wanted was security. I wanted to feel like our relationship was still secure. Mm-hmm. But I was kind of throwing these little temper tantrums, like a kid would, to get the attention and the security in that relationship that we needed. And so sometimes I would say, fine, I don't want to talk about religion anymore. And so my parents didn't think that they would take me at my word. They didn't think I wanted to talk about it anymore. But I did. And I wasn't being honest with my parents. And so this continued for about 5 years where we kind of off and on, we would sort of be in a good place and then we would have a fight and I would feel hurt and I'd withdraw. And it sort of came to a head just about a little over a year ago where I wrote a big letter to my family. Again, I'm still writing emails. But I basically say, like, I can't continue to do this. I'm upset. I'm depressed. I'm distracted from things that are important because I want to communicate with you. I don't want to feel estranged. So I am to the point where I'm going to take a break, like kind of a long break too. There's no expectations for around birthdays, holidays. I'm not going to visit. I just need to really kind of wall myself off and sort of fix my mental state and focus on my family. And this sparked a series of conversations where we were able to heal that relationship with my parents. We said, my mom wrote back and said, just the best thing she could ever said, that, I love you unconditionally. Your beliefs have nothing to do with it. We want to focus on just a relationship. We want that. We don't want there to be any agenda. And so we decided that we would start Skyping each other Once a week, we would set up the topics for discussion. We would create rules for those discussions, and going through that type of conversation that was more personal, less emotional, less judgmental, accepting, repaired our relationship. And now we can talk about anything. We can talk more about that process, but
yeah. And it really is amazing, because before, anytime there would be a family email that would go out about, I don't know, anything remotely related to the church, or even political, like something political that happened, or some new development in church news that would trigger us. It always would just cause this like tension, even if it was not really apparent, obvious tension. It was always underlying it. And now since we've been doing these conversations, again, which we can talk more about, it is completely different. Like there is no tension there. I never feel that way. I don't feel awkward at all. It's completely gone. It's amazing. So it's just been an incredible experience to do this, because it has worked so well.
Well, I'm dying to get into that. I just want to note something that feels remarkable to me, which is so many people who go through a faith crisis, it seems like they get written off by their immediate family and friends. And it's just always awkward, and it's always distant. And in many cases, it just ruptures the relationship altogether. And it sounds like for your families, they were committed to the relationship fundamentally, regardless of sort of your status with the church. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so, but they didn't know what to do. I think they felt paralyzed because anything that they did or shared seemed to trigger us. And so I think they just kind of froze. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know if we wanted to talk or not talk. Should we just have a superficial relationship, or we avoid religion or not? And nothing was really working. The way that I was interpreting it, from my end, was that they just were indifferent to me. There's a quote by Elie Wiesel that says, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference.
Right.
And their indifference, or at least that's the way I perceived it, to me signaled my religion, my beliefs, my testimony is more important than you. I will spend time reading the scriptures and serving in the church and doing all this stuff, but I'm not going to take 2 hours and hear you tell your story without interrupting you. That's the way it felt. But they were not. They were trying to
save the relationship.
They were trying to do what
by
they thought.
Avoiding those topics.
Right. They were trying to do what I was saying to do.
Right.
But it was hurtful to me.
But they just didn't realize that. They thought that they were doing the right thing by avoiding those controversial topics, avoiding the church thing, and just trying to focus on the relationship.
But I felt that I was being forced to be an actor, and I was acting in a role that they wanted me to be, which was, don't say anything controversial, don't be honest. I felt muzzled. I felt like I was being forced into talking about superficial things, and I'm not a person that likes to talk about superficial things. So I felt restricted, restrained, muzzled. And it was a very frustrating time in our life until we were able to fix it.
Well, let's dive in. How did you have that conversation to take away the awkwardness, to take away the uncertainty and tension? Because that sounds like a holy grail,
Well, it wasn't one conversation. It was a series of conversations. That's the first point.
Yeah. So we listened to a Mormon Matters podcast with Chelsea Shields, I think was her name. And
Chelsea Shields, yeah.
Yeah, I think she has a last name. That's her maiden name. And her parents, Heidi and Eric, I believe.
Uh-huh.
It was this podcast about mutual respect and building relationships despite differences of religious opinion. And I decided it was a great example of a grown-up person who's left the church, Chelsea, talking to her parents about religion. And so I sent that I sent that to my mom and my dad after I sent this initial email saying, I'm ready to take a break. This is too stressful for me. And they listened to it. They thought it was very helpful.
Can I add something to that?
Mm-hmm.
Before that they responded, I do think this is important. He mentioned that his mom responded to his email with her response was perfect. It was great. It was just what he needed to hear. And it was interesting. She mentioned in there that they had met with one of their friends who was a therapist, a counselor, and they had talked about it. And so they had kind of gotten advice from this therapist or counselor how to best go about communicating. And I think, so that's just a shout out to, if you need advice, if you need help, if you need some practical, skills or whatever, don't be afraid to ask for it, because I think that really, she said exactly what she needed to say, and it was just perfect. And so anyway, I think that was, yeah. And I think part of that was advice that she'd gotten was, you need to listen to your son. And that's why they were willing to listen to this podcast.
Right. And they did get some valuable advice. I then sent them, they both listened to the podcast. They thought it was great. My mom really identified with Heidi, the mother. Then I sent them, so we were trying to set up some ground rules for this conversation. They had gone to see a counselor and had talked to them about active listening. And I sent them a link from, let's see what it's called, helpguide.org. It's an organization, they partner with Harvard Medical School, and there's a section about conflict resolution skills that I thought was real good. And basically what they say is, focus on the relationship. Well, I guess I'll just translate their advice to kind of a Mormon setting. This is what I told my parents, these are the rules. Let's focus on our relationship and our story. Not on doctrine or the history or winning a debate. We just want to be able to tell our stories, and in return, let's use some active listening. So don't interrupt, don't try to lecture, and when I'm done explaining, restate, and vice versa. When you're talking, we just listen, and then we restate and make sure that we get what you're trying to say, because we were just miscommunicating for 5 years. So that was key. Let's see. We said, let's talk about our beliefs and our feelings. Let's be honest. No taboo subjects out there, but let's not mistake our feeling, even, and our beliefs, even strongly held beliefs, as facts. One of the things we picked up from the podcast was that the barrier in Chelsea's relationship with her parents was that Chelsea thought that her parents thought she was sinning, and she was triggered anytime they interpreted her leaving the church as a sinful act, and I was as well. And Chelsea's parents were triggered whenever they felt they were being called dumb or stupid, that there's something stupid about religion or Mormon doctrine.
That dynamic was very applicable to our situation.
I said, let's avoid negative emotions. If we start to feel anger, sadness, frustration, creep into the conversations, let's, recognize them, maybe take a break. Again, don't try to win a debate. No agenda. We had to get rid of this idea of there's an agenda other than just communicate, talk, and repair relationships. And then the other thing was, we can't go backwards. We can't dwell on the past. Our memory is imperfect. Let's just be willing to forgive, understand, that we went about this wrong. I did for sure, and they did some things that they wish they could have changed as well. And then, and active listening, which we already talked about. So those are kind of our ground rules. And then they agreed to them. We kind of went back and forth just a little bit about some of the rules. So we both came to the table with this shared mental model of how the discussions were going to go, backed up by some good social science research about conflict resolution. And then we decided on topics that we were going to talk about. And my topics were, number one, our relationship needs, difficulties in the past, how we're going to go forward. Number two, my religious journey. I just needed to tell my story.
That's what he'd been trying to do in the emails all those years.
Over and over and over and over.
I just want to be heard, right?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah. Yeah.
And the irony is, once you get heard, then you're sort of like you're better. But if you never feel heard, years and years and years, you're just fighting for that one chance to get heard, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Number 3, I wanted to allow my parents to tell me their experience and their reaction to my own faith journey, because I didn't fully understand the pain and the frustration they were going through, and so we were just going to listen. And then 4th, I wanted to talk about what we believe now about morality, values, meaning, truth, happiness, politics, and then lastly, what are we going to do going forward? Goals. Let's avoid pitfalls. Let's talk about pearls, and kind of summarize what we've learned. And so we did that over a period of about 4 months. We met every Sunday. We talked online,
and we did it over Skype because we found that it's more, you need to have that face to face. If you can't do it in person, obviously, then do it over Skype or something, because there's so much that you lose that's there in body language. And you need that. You need to have that connection physically. So that was really important.
Yeah. So we did that over the course of a few months, and it was just so incredibly healing to be able to tell our stories, listen, reciprocate, validate. I felt valued. I felt secure in my relationship with my parents once again. They were able to reassure me that a lot of the stuff that maybe is said over the pulpit or in an Ensign article about secular people and how they're kind of like Korihor and yada yada yada, they don't agree with. So again, I felt secure in that relationship, and we've continued these discussions. Not every week, but and we talk about politics. We discovered that we're both on the same page a lot. Well, not totally.
We agree on a lot recently.
We found that
whole Trump stuff.
Right. We found that
it's been
more
good.
that unites us than divides us, and we have a great relationship now. So I thought that was kind of the miracle that I was able to, but we were able to repair a relationship that I was ready to give up on, that I thought was irreparably damaged and unfixable. And, just with some some simple tools for conflict resolution, we're able to fix that. Now, I will add that I don't think it's possible for everybody.
It definitely, this is not I don't think, I actually kind of tried to do something similar with my parents. And I realized that this is not a one size fits all, because it's like what we were talking about before. Not everybody wants to go that route of trying to get into the nitty gritty and really understand. Some people, it's much easier for them to they're capable of that. They're capable of just saying, I don't want to talk about the church again. It's over and done with. You're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing, but we can still have a relationship. And if that works for people, if that's something that, both parties can do, then I think that's kind of the easier thing to do if it can work, but it has to work on both ends. Like with Josh and his parents, I don't think either party were able or willing or wanted that kind of a relationship. And so I think it worked for this, and it might work for other people if they feel like they're in a similar situation, but I wouldn't say it's a solution for everyone.
Got it. But it's a nice option that I'm sure a lot of people don't even know exists, and it sounds like it was really effective.
It really was, yeah. And I think I was going to add one more thing to the story. His mom, I think one of the other things that really helped around the same time that he sent the email, she was teaching a woman in her ward who was going through a faith transition. She was a young mom with little kids. And when we ended up talking about this, she said, it was really, I learned so much because she was teaching this girl in her ward. This girl would tell her like she kind of spill her, get all of her angst out, on my mother-in-law. And so she knew a lot of like why she was struggling with her faith and the things that bugged her about Mormon culture and even like feminism and stuff. being a woman in the church. And so all of these kind of millennial type issues that are going on right now, she was talking to my mother-in-law about. And so that kind of personal experience of her being able to listen to that, that woman's experience, but it's not her own daughter. It's not, it's a little bit
There's distance
there. So she could kind of listen and be like, I get where you're coming from. Like, I want you to stay and all these things, but she was able to understand it better. And so she brought that to the table when we were talking about Josh too, because now she suddenly had this other perspective that she could kind of add to this picture of, okay, what does it look like for someone who leaves the church? And so that was, I think, that was helpful to the situation.
Will you guys make sure and share with us links to both the Chelsea Shields thing and the Harvard Rules of Healthy Communication, or whatever those things were?
Oh, yeah.
We'll include them in the show notes if you send those to us.
Sure.
Okay.
Is that okay? Our listeners are wondering how this affected friendships, and they've asked two questions. I'll ask them both. One is, did you lose friendships over this? You talked about these amazing friends in San Diego and other places. Did you lose friends over this? Did you have other friends that experienced this stuff with you? So that's kind of one part of the question. And then the other part of the question is, have people come out to you since seeking help and support through their transition because they knew you were out? So first part and then the second part of the question. It's actually three parts of the question.
So yes, as far as losing friends, not really. I mean, I think a lot of it, we happened to move, right when we were leaving. So we were physically being separated from our friends in San Antonio. So that, and being in the military, we're kind of used to having long distance friendships anyway, because people move. I don't feel like I lost any friends, but I did have one of my friends, one of my close friends from San Antonio, when I called her and told her that, I was leaving the church. We joke about it now because she said that she basically tried to break up with me. And she kind of said like, oh, I don't even know that we're going to even have anything in common anymore, because I just felt like so much of our friendship was based around this common identity of being Mormons. And I just called her out on it. I'm like, no, you can't break up with me. We have a better bond than that. We have so much that bonds us together. Like, it doesn't matter. And anyway, we kind of talked about it and she was like, yeah, you're right. And so, we've been able to, actually, she has since left the church. So that's actually not even an issue now. But no, I mean, I've had several, so I don't feel like I lost any friends because of the church necessarily, but I'm also the kind of person that has my close friends, and those are the ones that I keep in my life. And most of my close friends from those days in the church have actually left the church by now, I think. So on their own accord, not because of anything that I did, but quite a few have ended up out of the church. And what was the other part of the question?
Have people, like, since learning that you've come out, kind of come to you as they confided in you to get support?
You're talking about Liz a little.
Yeah, my sister has a little. I'm trying to, before I go into that, any friends? I can't really think of any friends per se that have.
They might now.
Maybe. I mean, we're pretty open about it. It's not a secret at this point. No, so I actually have a younger sister who is also going through a faith transition right now, and so that's been really bonding for us to be able to, talk and stuff. And she, I think she did come to me initially when she was first finding out things that she didn't know about the church. And I think I kind of did exactly what you had been saying earlier, John, that I was very reluctant to give her any kind of information. She would vent to me. She kind of had a feminist awakening, and she was venting to me about the patriarchy and all this stuff. And I would listen and I would empathize. And then, she'd ask me a question about Joseph Smith or polygamy or something, and I'd kind of tell her like the facts, and then I'd recommend, go read this, or whatever. And just because I didn't want to be responsible, to be the person that ever was responsible for someone losing their faith. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do. And if you're kind of happy and it's working for you and your life is good, I have no desire to change that or disrupt that in any way. I know some people don't agree with that, but that's just me personally. I would never want to change that for someone. And so, so that was kind of that experience, but she's just kind of gone on her own journey, and it's been great because I've been able to be there for her and listen, and we've really bonded and shared a lot of experiences together and stuff, but it's not, I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question.
Sure. No, that's great. What a great thing to be able to support a family member.
Yeah, it's been really great. Yeah, it's been great.
It's so hard because, and I talk about this, I call it the Nephi effect. And I wish the Book of Mormon had a female character or two to mention, that we could have a female hero in the Book of Mormon, but alas, there aren't that many. But it's this idea that if we're these Orthodox TBM righteous members, we get used to that status of being viewed as faithful, as strong, as courageous. And I think most of us feel like it's strength and courage and integrity that lead to the faith crisis, because it's not fun. It's not easy. It's a matter of doing what is right and letting the consequence follow. And at the same time, that's not how it's perceived by our family members. It's perceived by them as weakness and evil and sin. And so we desperately want to not lose our Nephi status by helping them just see that it was actually a matter of integrity and goodness and logic and truth. And that if you can just somehow explain that to them, then they'll go, oh my gosh, Josh and Heidi are actually brilliant, amazing, courageous people. But in reality, when you're in that mindset, there's no righteous way to leave the church. There's no truthful, courageous. It's got to be Satan. It's got to be sin. It's got to be deception. There's no other Mormon construct that allows a grace
for looking at pornography or wanting to drink coffee and alcohol. I left after a careful study and thought and prayer about the church. It was a careful process, and I wanted to try to get that out as unemotionally as possible. I just thought that my logic can at least create a little bit of space that they could listen to me later on. And it just went bad. It was a terrible thing. My emails went out to the family like, hey, Josh is just trying to convince you, don't listen to him. Walls came up, the wagons circled. Yeah. And I tried to resolve these concerns that were popping up by more emails. I go back and I read these emails, and it's so painful because I just was making things worse. All the things that I was trying to avoid, those judgments, the alienation from family, the estrangement, it was just happening. And there was nothing that I could do to stop it. And that's exactly what I wanted to avoid. I wanted my family I wanted to continue those relationships and fix any of the problems that would pop up. But I couldn't do it because I was emailing.
And you did provide details, right, of why?
Yeah, I did, but I tried to avoid, like, did you know that Joseph Smith had 33 wives? And it just was like, here's my issues: polygamy, blacks in the priesthood. I won't go into details, but these are the things that caused me doubt and caused me to leave. Youngest daughter later, just on there, we went for a walk, and I told her. I think that went well. What didn't go well was when I tried to tell my family. And I guess I would say that my situation with my family was, we had we loved each other. I didn't feel like my parents did not love me, but we weren't very close because I'm pretty independent. We'd been living away for years during our medical education, and we'd stayed connected mostly through like emails and very rare, phone calls. And so I just thought, and then another thing, I don't think I'm very good verbally. I think I do better if I write things out. That's sort of my strength. And I could take some time and write it out logically, and people would read it, and they would know where I'm coming from. And so I decided that it would be best to write an email and send it out to the entire family.
And your parents are.
And my dad is the mission president in Africa at the time, and it didn't go well for obvious reasons. So that was a mistake. Even though I read my email now, and I don't think I said anything too offensive. I didn't try to convert anybody. I just wanted, the big thing for me was I didn't want them to think all the stereotypes of people who leave the church are true with me. I didn't leave because I was sinful, stealing money from the church or having an affair.
Camp that year, I think, or maybe that happened later. Anyway, so she because she was 12, so she had just kind of been the most invested.
Yeah,
in
so she struggled a little bit. By the time I got back from Iraq, she was a disbelieving atheist as well.
Whoa.
Yeah.
How long were you in Iraq again? 7
months.
Holy moly. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, things cycled kind of quick after I left. The rest of the kids, like our oldest son, Noah, he didn't care. He was like, yeah, I think church is boring. I don't want to go. And then our youngest, Sam,
5, he didn't.
He's like our kid that has not been touched at all by the church. We took him to church once in Arizona when we were visiting family years later. And they sat him down in the class with a bunch of other kids
in primary,
and the teacher asks, okay, let's go down the line and everybody say your blessings. And
no, they had to write down with crayons a list of blessings.
Yeah. And they get to Sam and they're like, Sam, what are your blessings? And he's like, what's a blessing? And
like, what do you mean by
what do you mean by blessing?
Like that was just like the terminology.
Right. And if you think about it, if you weren't raised in the church with this idea that God gives you things and these things are called blessings, you wouldn't know what that word really meant. So, and then I told Isabel, our
All right, good. So that's just like full unraveling then.
Yeah, pretty much. And then so he told our kids at different times.
How did he tell them? Did you guys get on the same page before he did that?
I told the kids after. No, this was pretty soon. Like things were still pretty tense between me and Heidi.
Within a couple weeks.
Yeah, the kids,
a week or two.
The kids, especially the older ones, could pick up on the tension. So I got most of the kids together. One of our kids was at gymnastics or something. So I told 3 of our 4 kids in my bedroom, just sat them down. I told them, and our oldest, Grace.
We'll mention Grace.
Yeah,
she commented.
Grace thought I was kidding. She's like, "What? No, you're just kidding, right? You're kidding. It's a joke." And, I finally convinced her it wasn't a joke. And she had been the most, I guess, indoctrinated in the church. So she pushed back a little bit.
She just started Young Women's. That was her first time going to girls'